Is Green Buzard. I am a violinist and a violist, and I have been playing the violin for over 20 years and teaching for just about 8. I'm teaching this class today because I love to share music, and I particularly love to share music through the violin, which is my favorite instrument. And so this class is going to cover kind of a whole host of basics about what is the violin, kind of what are the essential parts of the instrument, how does it fit into the family of stringed instruments. We'll talk about how to hold the violin and how to hold the bow. We'll cover what is tuning, just real basics. And then we'll also do an introduction to where to put your fingers on the neck of the violin and how to make a sound with the instrument. At the end of the class, I'm going to be covering kind of some of the musical versatility of the instrument. The violin is used in everything from, classical, orchestral, chamber music to rock, pop, movies, fiddling traditions from all over the world, folk music. So it's a really, really incredibly versatile instrument. I'm going to demonstrate some of that versatility. At the end, there will be an opportunity for further Q&A, but during our class today, I encourage you to submit your questions through the question and answer icon, which again, if you don't know Zoom, if you hover over the screen, there's a little icon bar that will appear at the bottom of your video screen, and you can click on Q&A, and that will pop up a little window. And any questions that come up during any section of the class today, you can submit to me, and I'll either answer them along the way or at the end. And then at the very end of the class, we'll have a chance to answer any wrap-up questions. I will be putting in the chat a few items. The first is my teaching profile on TakeLessons.com. There it is. I just submitted it, and I just want to remind you all, or inform you, that today through Take Lessons and the opportunity to teach you all this free class, we're offering a discount on lessons with me. So that code is GET10, and I encourage you to check out my profile and use that promotional code if you're interested in booking some lessons with me after this presentation and class together. So we've done a few introductions, and I see we've had some others join us. So I've gotten a little bit of a picture of where folks are from a little bit and experience level. But if you haven't piped in yet and want to say just what made you interested in the class today, or what your interest in the violin is, or your experience level, I'd love to hear and just get a little bit of a picture of that. If you could put that into the chat. So I'll give you a few seconds to try that out. And thank you. I already have a question from Lisa about rosining the bow. That is a great question, and we will definitely talk about that. Thank you. All right. Very little experience from a few of you. Great. All right, well, you can keep on typing in those answers as we move along. And let's go ahead and get started. So, what is the violin? You've probably seen one, if not held one. Perhaps you have one. The violin is part of the family of stringed instruments, and it's the smallest and highest pitched of the instruments that you would typically see in an orchestra. So the violin is the smallest. The biggest one you would see would be like a double bass, where people are standing up and playing it. Next up from the double bass is the cello, where folks have to sit and play. Then you have the viola, which can kind of look like a giant violin, but is a really, really different instrument. And then you have the violin. So it's a hollow-bodied wooden instrument. It's a very delicate, violins are very delicate works of art. They're created by luthiers who spend years in training, learning how to build an instrument that will resonate and create beautiful tone. So there's a couple different things we're going to talk about with just going through the different parts of the violin. It's really important when you're beginning to learn this instrument that you understand what all of the different parts are of the instrument and what their function is. So to begin, let's just name each of the kind of major physical parts of the violin you can see on the front of the instrument. These are the strings. This is what we play with our bow or that we pluck. We also have the bridge. The only thing keeping the strings in tension is this bridge, and it's not glued, it's not stapled, it's just held upright by the tension of the strings. We also have, then this is the tailpiece. This is where the strings kind of hook in to here, and then they also wrap around through these pegs at the top of the violin, at the end of the neck, and it's a mechanism at the tailpiece or these pegs at the top that either tighten or loosen the string. Strings, when loosed, will descend in pitch, and strings that are higher, that are tightened, will ascend in pitch. We also have the chin rest, or really kind of jaw rest. This is where, we'll cover this in a moment, but this is where our chin will rest on the instrument. We have the body of the violin, the neck, and the scroll. And then finally, this part that is colored black, you can see my violin is sort of an orange color, and this part is colored black. This is what we call the fingerboard. It's the place where we place our fingers. A few other really essential parts of the violin to know about are inside. If you have an instrument or when you get one, you can look sort of inside the instrument and you'll see a post that goes up and down. That's the sound post, and it is also only held up by kind of the tension of how the instrument holds together. So when someone is making a violin, they glue the seams all together, but the sound post itself just stands up by natural torque and tension. Finally, you might see these really ornate holes in the body of the violin. These allow the sound to project, and they're called F-holes. I see you have a question about the key difference or feature between the violin, viola, and the contrabass, although the string quartet is not usually included a bass, it's usually a cello. So besides increased size, pitch descends. So the lowest, we'll go over strings in a minute, but the lowest string on a violin is a G below middle C. And the lowest string on a viola is an octave below middle C, and then it descends from there. So that's one of the major differences is pitch. And then I would say, you know, violins, violas, and cellos all have a different voice. If you hear a solo for a cello, cellos can have a whole range of musical expression that is really different from the violin. And so some of that is subjective in terms of your own interpretation of sound, but I think that they are very different instruments with regard to the kinds of things you can express musically with them. So thanks for that question. That question I found in the chat, so if you could, in the future, if you have more questions, please specifically put them in the Q&A, just because it's a little easier for me to keep track of them there in case things get pushed up in the chat. Thank you. So those are the basic parts of the violin. Just to review, we have the bridge, we have the tailpiece, the chin rest, the fingerboard, the body, the neck, the scroll, the pegs, and inside is the sound post. The other thing you might notice is I have this little object on the back of my instrument. This is called a shoulder rest. And some of the greatest players in the world play with a shoulder rest, many do not. They're a relatively contemporary invention in the last, really only in popularity in like the last 50 to 60 years. What the shoulder rest does is it gives you a little bit of a cushion and allows you to just hold the violin with a little bit more stability. I prefer to use one, but I've also played plenty of times without a shoulder rest, and I just put either a cloth or a little towel or something to protect my neck from the instrument and to give a little bit of a cushion with my shoulder. But if you have one, you put it on like this. I like to think about it as sort of like a smiley face. And I hold the violin up like this, and then you just sort of slide it on just like that. So let's move on. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to hold your violin. Now, the violin is an unnatural instrument to hold. It's not really like a very natural human posture to sit or stand with an instrument with our arms out like this. So because it has the potential to create a lot of tension, because it's an unnatural thing to hold, we really have to cultivate awareness and mindfulness of our body in holding the instrument of the violin to make sure that we're able to stay, to lower or eliminate tension and move from our center when we play. So whether you're sitting or standing, the way you'll begin to hold your violin, stand up or sit up straight. Pretend there's like a little string coming from the back of your head, like a puppet. Oh, it's bringing you up to the ceiling. Then you'll bring the violin to your shoulder. And I don't know how it looks to you all. In my video, it's reversed. So it's going to be on your left shoulder. It might look like it's on my right shoulder in your video, but it's on my left shoulder and it'll be on your left shoulder. So bring it in just against your neck here. And the thing with the chin rest, it's not a cheek rest and it's not a chin rest. It's more of a jaw rest. So you want it to kind of sit in a way where it's comfortable, that you can just simply turn your head and then rest your jaw on the chin rest. Now, some chin rests will be placed differently, so if you have a violin with you today and your chin rest is more centered over the tailpiece, that's totally okay. I recommend that if you haven't, or if you're going to be getting a violin in a shop, you have them help you fit a chin rest to you based on kind of your own physical needs over here. And anybody, you know, a salesperson or luthier in a violin shop will be able to help you figure that out. So here we have the violin. Like I said, it's going to come into your shoulder, sit, and then you're going to just slightly turn your jaw and rest it. Now the violin, this is important, it should be relatively parallel to the floor. So you can see my scroll, which is the curly part at the end. My scroll is, oh, I see someone says I appear correctly for participants. Thank you. That's from our host at Take Lessons. Thank you. All right, so the scroll should not be up in the air, and neither should it point towards the ground. It should sort of be just parallel here. And then the instrument itself is also not going to be flat. You can see because it's resting on your shoulder, the instrument itself is going to have a slight angle towards the ground. So you can hold your instrument here if you have your violin with you. And you want to make sure, like I said about tension, that your shoulders are not up and they're not drooped forward. Just want to be tall and stand or sit tall and relaxed. Very good. Okay, so the next piece is the bow. The bow is equally a work of art, like the violin. Let's just quickly talk about a few of the features of the bow. The main parts of the bow are the stick, which maybe your violin bow is likely made out of Pernambuco wood, which is a rare Brazilian wood that is used for most professional bows in the world. But because it's rare and people are trying to be more environmentally conscious, increasingly people are finding synthetic ways to make really high quality bows. So your bow might be made out of carbon fiber or another synthetic material as well. So that's the stick. Then we have the hair. The hair is always horsehair. And it's really important that you never touch the hair because it has something which we call rosin, which is made out of tree sap, that we actually put onto the bow. And what that does is it creates a sort of stickiness that allows it to create friction with the string when we play. The other parts of the bow, this is a funny name for this little square piece at the bottom. This is called the frog. We also have the grip here. This little peg, this turns to the right and left, and with this item we tighten and loosen the hair on the bow. If the hair is loose, there's no tension on it and we can't actually produce sound on the instrument. It's important that you store your bow with the hair loose because when you tighten it, it increases pressure or tightness on the stick. And we don't want the stick to warp or anything while it's in storage. So when you're ready to play, you can tighten your bow. You should be able to fit about a little bit more than a pencil or pen's length between it. The other part of the bow, this is the tip. This is the tip plate. And that's sort of the bow. It's a little bit more simple. You will notice that there's sort of a natural curve to the bow here, and that's supposed to be there. All right, so let's talk about how to hold the bow. There are three elements that are really, really essential for holding the bow: shape, balance, and flexibility. So I'm going to show you how to hold the bow. If you're really new to the instrument or you don't have one, you can grab a pencil or a pen and you can practice on the pencil or the pen as well while we're doing this. And then I encourage you after our class today, if you're looking for more information about the bow, I encourage you to look at violinmasterclass.com. That place has a video that has been really important for when I'm teaching my students to help them remember how to build a good bow hold outside of our lesson. So I'm going to hold this up kind of close so you can see. So like I said, shape is essential first. So I'm just going to show you my bow hold first, and then I'll show you how I build it. So you can see that my hand is basically sort of wrapped around the bow. And the first thing you're going to do to build your bow hold is to have a central balance point. You can think about your hand on the bow sort of like a seesaw or a teeter-totter. You want to have a fulcrum in the middle, and your index finger and your pinky are going to sit in a way to be the different ends of the teeter-totter. So your thumb is going to come in and it's going to hook into this little spot between the frog and the bow grip. And it's going to be sort of on the tip of your finger. And this is the only time when you're really going to touch the hair. Your thumb knuckle will just sort of sit right against the hair there. Then these middle fingers, I like to call them our friends at the pool. They like to just sit on the edge of the pool and let their feet dangle in. So these right here above the central knuckle in your finger is going to sit on the stick of the bow, and then these guys are just going to hang out. Now you should be able to hold your pencil or your bow with just these. This is the balance point. Then your first finger is going to wrap around and it will hit right just above or at your middle knuckle here. And then your pinky gets to sit on top. Now with this bow hold, it should be, like we said here, we've got shape and balance. So you should be able to maybe push down or with your index finger and do a little push-up with your pinky. And I encourage pinky push-ups every day that you work on building your bow hold. The final thing is flexibility. So while we want our hand in the bow hold to keep its shape, we also don't want our fingers to be rigid. This has to do what I was talking about with tension. This is not really a natural way our hand normally moves. That means we need to cultivate flexibility so that we don't grip really tight and thus build up tension in our arm. All right. Do we have any questions? I just want to stop quickly. Any questions about the parts of the violin or the bow before we move on to how to make sound on the instrument? Oh, I want to make sure I answer the question from someone who asked about how much do I rosin the bow. So, like I mentioned, one moment, I'm going to grab my rosin. Rosin is, it can come in all different colors. Mine happens to be green, like my name. And it's made out of either natural sap or a synthetic material, and what it does is it creates stickiness on the bow so that it can grab the string. How much you rosin really depends on how much you're playing. If you're getting dust flying up from your violin when you're playing or off the bow, then you probably have too much rosin on, and I take a soft cloth and sort of wipe down the hair. I usually rosin my bow, I'm playing several hours a day. I usually rosin my bow every other day, every few days. It kind of just depends on if I'm feeling like my bow is not able to produce sound or is starting to get a little airy sounding. So certainly if you're just starting out, I don't recommend rosining your bow every day unless you were playing for hours and hours. So that is my recommendation about rosin. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about how to make sound out of your instrument. So there's two primary ways we make sound on the violin. The first one that we're going to do is to pluck the string. There are 4 strings on the instrument. The lowest is G. The next highest in pitch is D. The next after that is A. And the final string is E. This G, if you're familiar with the piano keyboard, is the G just below middle C. And then it goes up in fifths after that. So, if you have a violin, go ahead and get it up on your shoulder as I demonstrated just a few minutes ago. Because we're just going to be plucking the string, if you're practicing plucking the string at home, also known as pizzicato, you can just hang on to your instrument right here. Now, my first orchestra teacher always said it this way, and I just think it's sort of cute and funny, so I like to teach it too, which is that if you're going to play pizzicato, you can take your thumb and put it on the ouchie, which is just the edge of the fingerboard right here where it's sharp. It's not going to hurt you, but it is not dull. So you put your thumb there, and using the pad of your finger, you can pluck each string on the instrument. Now you can hear, it's important to use the pad, because if you tried to use your fingernail or the really tip of your finger, you'd get kind of a tinny sound. But with the pad and plucking over the fingerboard, never here between the bridge and the fingerboard. For the same reason that you don't want to touch the hair of the violin, it's important not to touch the string between the bridge and the fingerboard, because we'll get our oily fingers on it and it will reduce the capacity for your bow to actually make sound on the string. So thumb on the ouchie, grab the string with the pad of your finger, and pluck. You can even practice, we'll get to finger placement in just a second, but you can even practice scales or really basic songs that you're learning with plucking if you want to work on more of your left hand technique before you add in the bow. All right. Next, we're going to cover making a sound with the bow. So, if you have an instrument with you today, first of all, let's review. Let's build a really nice bow hold. So, thumb in that little groove with the knuckle resting against the hair. The middle fingers come out and balance as the center of the teeter-totter. The first finger wraps around, and the pinky sits on top. So when you're ready, We're just going to start with some open strings, and by that I mean I'm not going to be placing any fingers down on the string. It's important when you're bowing, and especially when you're just starting out, that you do a couple of things. First of all, you want to place your bow onto the string with a flat hair. So you're not going to turn the bow to this side or that side. It's just going to be flat against the string. The other thing is that we want to make sure while we're starting out that we place the bow in what is often called the Kreisler Highway, after a famous violinist by the name of Kreisler. And this just means playing right kind of in the middle between the bridge and the fingerboard. Now, many violinists or fiddle players will play a lot closer to the bridge or a lot closer to the fingerboard, depending on the kind of sound they want to get. But especially as we're just starting out and we're learning how to produce a good sound and a good tone, playing in the highway in the center here will really help us out. The other thing is that before you begin to bow, you want to make sure that everything is aligned with your right arm, so that it feels like your shoulder sort of naturally, your arm kind of naturally comes down straight from your shoulder and creates basically a right angle. Finally, when you begin to play with the bow, I want to make sure, this is really, really essential, and if you are practicing and you need to watch yourself in a mirror, I highly encourage it. Make sure you're opening and closing from your elbow. I'm going to demonstrate that in just a minute, but make sure you're bowing from your elbow, not from your shoulder. Finally, you'll want to make sure that the bow is going straight. So one moment, I'm just going to lower my computer here just a titch so you can see my arm a little bit better. That's much better. So I'm going to begin bowing on the open A string, and I really want you to watch what's happening with my elbow and with the direction of the bow. So as you can see, I was really just opening and closing my elbow while moving the bow down and up. Now, if you're interested in playing on other strings, which you eventually will, one important thing to remember is that you can imagine each string of the violin is sort of like its own plane. You can think about it geometrically like planes, or like pieces of paper that sit on different planes, if that helps you. So every time you move, you want to move to a different string, it's a micro movement, but you're going to move to a different plane. When you do that, your elbow and your shoulder is going to move, but it will never move this way. It will only move up or down. So let me show you the difference between me playing on the E string. You can see my elbow opening and closing. Now I'm going to move down to the G string. I want you to watch my shoulder movement. Whoa! Did you see how far it moved up? So if you're at home and you have an instrument, I encourage you to, if you're just starting out with bowing, to just explore open strings. What kind of sound do they make? Can you move from string to string without hitting other strings? Can you play one string 10 or 15 or 20 times in a row without making other strings sound? And then you can even, after you're done with that, you can even start to say, can I maybe play more than one string in one bow? Now when I do that, you can see my shoulder and my arm kind of naturally following the different planes of the strings. So those are the basics of making sound on your instrument. You've got plucking and bowing. And like I say, if you're just starting out with playing your violin, I really encourage exploring open strings and just focusing on what's happening in your bow arm. Because once we do what I'm going to demonstrate next, add in fingers with our left hand, we've got a whole nother can of worms that we're opening up. So when you're first starting to learn the violin, we'll do a lot of things to separate out the right hand and the left hand and then bring them together. So you've explored everything with open strings in your bow and you're ready to add in fingers. I'm going to show you one of the most basic finger patterns on the violin, and it's one that you'll use in the basic or first position on the instrument. And when I say first position, I just mean you'll sometimes see violinists or fiddle players playing like way up here or right here, and those are different positions based on, we give them number names. When you're in first position, you're sort of just at the base of the neck here, and it's sort of the starting point for all violin playing. So I'm going to show you my finger position on the A string, and we're going to just begin to go up the scale starting on A. So unlike a guitar or a mandolin, a violin has no frets. This means that you are totally in control of if a note is played on the right pitch or not. And while that might sound scary, it's actually really cool because eventually you're going to learn exactly where your fingers go without having to think about it. So I'm going to show you just this way where my fingers go here, and then I'll demonstrate it playing. So if I'm starting on open A, my first finger will be on B, will be about right there. Second finger on C sharp will be right there, and my third finger is going to be neighbors with my second finger on D. And this finger pattern, like this, you're going to use this all the time, and especially as you're beginning to learn, beginning violin songs, usually oftentimes they're in the key of A or the key of D or the key of G, and all of those will use this finger pattern on most, if not all, of the strings. So I'm going to demonstrate and try to give you a good view of what my fingers look like when I play this way. If I wanted to go up and complete the scale, I'd play open E. Going down the scale, you can see how my fingers are spaced here. Now, if you're going to practice this at home, I really encourage you to go slowly and try to really hold down each of your fingers and don't lift them up individually. A common mistake with left hands on the fingerboard is that if you're playing a note, every other finger will sort of get tense and like drop down here, pinky in the basement I like to call it. You want to make sure all of your fingers are relaxed, and they should just be kind of naturally curved, sort of like your hand is when you let it rest at your side. The other thing you might have a question about is, where do I put my thumb? And the thumb kind of acts like a crook. You can see I just have it resting here, sort of just by my last thumb knuckle, and there should be space. You can see a little space between my thumb and my hand, and on this side it should rest, the neck of the violin should rest right here. So about right here is where the neck is, in between these two fingers. Finally, another important tip about this is a common thing is to want to flatten out your hand like this. And while this is very tempting, I encourage you to just straighten your wrist. Everything should hang down loosely and with no tension from your shoulder down to your elbow, from your wrist down to your elbow. All aligns. Alrighty, I just want to stop and check in with all of you who are here with me in this class. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A. You can find that by hovering over the video and there should be an icon bar that pops up and you can click Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the final part of my class with you all today, which is to talk about the versatility of the violin. But if you have questions about anything that I've talked about so far, please go ahead and stick those in the Q&A and we'll take a few minutes at the end to cover them. All right, so like I mentioned at the beginning of this class, one of the things, or one of the main things I love about the violin as an instrument is how versatile it is. It's used all over the world in all sorts of different kinds of music and musical traditions. And it's increasingly been used in popular music, both like pop and indie rock and regular rock and jazz and all different kinds of musical traditions. So it's a really, really diverse instrument that fits into a lot of diverse settings. The one that you might think of right away, of course, though, is kind of traditional classical music. So perhaps you know this tune. That's Mozart's Eine kleine Nacht music. You also might be familiar with this very popular tune, often used at weddings. So those are some examples of kind of classical music that uses the violin. Of course, if you've ever seen an orchestra or listened to a recording of an orchestra, you'll hear the violins featured. Then, of course, we've also got violins that are featured in movie soundtracks, which is one of my favorite things. So here, I'm curious if any of you can name this one. Any guesses in the chat? What movie is that from? I'll wait a second more. Okay, this is no answers, but that is Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter by a very famous movie soundtrack composer, John Williams. We've also got, perhaps some of you are familiar with this movie soundtrack. So that's a theme, Hobbit's or Shire theme from the movie series The Lord of the Rings. So speaking of sort of fiddly sounding music though, one of the things I love to do is play and teach fiddle traditions from around the world. So there's a couple different fiddling traditions that you might be familiar with. There's sort of something that sounds similar to what I played from the Lord of the Rings movie, which would be more in the Celtic or British Isles tradition. You might also hear something more in the American fiddling tradition, which there's a couple different fiddling styles from the United States. One of them is called Old Time, comes more from the Appalachian Mountains. You might hear a tune like this one. Or you might hear something more in the bluegrass or Texas fiddling style. That's from Orange Blossom Special, and it's definitely, when you get into bluegrass and Texas fiddling, it's more showy. Old-time fiddling is more for dancing. So those are some of the different styles you can explore with the violin. Of course, the last one I wanted to share, I don't know if this will date me at all, but there's a lot of really famous violin riffs in pop music. You know, everything from Led Zeppelin to what I'm going to play, which is a little riff that might be familiar to you from a bygone pop star named Britney Spears. So perhaps you all have heard the song Toxic by Britney Spears. That's a song with a great violin riff in it. And I encourage you, as you listen to popular music, start to pick out, am I hearing violins here or am I hearing orchestra? Their stringed instruments are all over the place, and that's one of the great things about them, is that they can be used in many different contexts. So, to wrap up, before we do question and answer, I'm just going to offer just a snippet of a piece that to me combines kind of classical playing and fiddling. It's called Appalachia Waltz, and it's by a really prolific and famous American fiddler named Mark O'Connor. I really encourage you to look up his videos on YouTube. He's played with, you know, classical greats like Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist, to bluegrass giants like Edgar Meyer, a really famous bassist. So here's just a little snippet of Appalachia Waltz. Alrighty. Well, I am curious if anybody has any questions they'd like to share while you are perhaps preparing those. I'm just going to put into the chat here a link to my profile. I'd love to meet any of you and see if you're interested in taking lessons. Take Lessons and I are offering a promotion through this class for a discount on classes, and that discount is Get 10. I've also put that into the chat for you there. Thank you all for joining me today. It's been really great, and just wait a minute more here in case any of you have questions at the end of this class. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for joining. It's been a real pleasure, and if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and close. Thanks for joining today, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions through my Take Lessons profile, and be happy to teach you lessons. If you're interested, use that promo discount code GET10, and I'll hope to see you soon. Take care.